As we settle into patch 15.1, top lane is shaping up to be as exciting as ever. Whether you're looking for tanks to soak up damage, bruisers to bully the enemies, or carries to take over the late game, this patch has something for everyone. In this guide, we'll break down the best champions to dominate the top lane in 15.1, highlighting their strengths and why they're making waves on the Rift. Coming in at the number 4 spot, we have Urgot. So he's currently sitting at a 51.82% win rate in Gold Plus and a 3.6% pick rate. He's got a super low ban rate as well, coming in at the lowest on our list at 1.1%. So Urgot is a great champion to main at the moment because he's almost a guaranteed lock in pregame lobbies. Starting with some of the pros of Urgot. Urgot has a super strong level 1 thanks to his shotgun knees. He can completely burst down careless enemies by running circles around them in the early game. This is going to give him an early lead if you can pull this off. His ultimate Fear Beyond Death is awesome as a great long-range finisher, especially for catching enemies off guard. And while Urgot's early game is already pretty strong, it gets even better once he does unlock his ultimate. So you should really be looking to make plays in the early game, as that's where Urgot is going to get a lot of his power. That's where he can really snowball into the late game. Going into some of his cons, Urgot can be pretty vulnerable in lane when his corrosive charge and his E are on cooldown, and he also struggles against ranged champions since he's pretty susceptible to poke. In the late game, he does also start to fall off a bit as enemies start to build more defensive items. And on top of that, his ultimate can be countered by a Quicksilver Sash, which takes away a lot of its threat. Now for champions that Urgot is pretty strong against, he's going to be strong against champions that are weak in the early game. So something like a Singed, a Nasus, or even a Shin can really struggle due to Urgot's early game passive. Now on the flip side of things, Urgot is really going to struggle against poke-heavy champions like a Teemo or a Kennen, and he's going to be countered by champions who can disengage him pretty easily, something like a Poppy. Now, just some general tips when playing Urgot. Your ultimate is pretty slow and it's pretty easy to dodge, so just try to wait until the enemy has used their flash or escape ability. Then in team fights, you're going to make sure that you're using your ultimate on whoever your team is focusing to make it easier to finish them off. That's going to give you that quick and early kill to really turn the tide in your team's favor. And especially in the early game, you're going to make sure that you're moving a lot and kiting the enemy to get more damage with your passive. You quite literally want to go in sort of a semicircle around whichever target that you're focusing to get those explosive charges off. Up next on our list, what's a top lane list without the Dunk Master Darius? Darius is going to be number 3 on our list, and he's currently sitting at a 50.14% win rate in Gold Plus. He also has a pretty decent pick rate of about 10%, and he also has a very high ban rate as well, which is not super surprising, coming in just below Warwick at 20.5%. So Darius might be a little bit more difficult to lock in than other champions on this list. So let's go ahead and start with some of the pros of Darius. He's one of the strongest early game champions in the game. And one of the main reasons for this is due to his passive. This allows him to win almost every auto attack battle. And this is going to be exceptionally strong in low elo because in low elo, people are always looking to fight and trade. So in terms of pros, he's very strong early and he's going to be able to win for the most part any trade in top lane, especially once you hit level 6 and unlock your ultimate. So a very early game and a very aggressive champion to play. Now some of the cons of Darius is he's very easy to kite and he's not very mobile either. So any champions with dashes or a range advantage are going to be able to just dance around him pretty easily. And then another big con of Darius is he does fall off pretty hard in the late game. And if you're not getting your reset in those team fights late game, you do lose quite a bit of your power. So if you do find yourself in a late game team fight, make sure that you're trying to get that execute so that you can reset your ultimate. So he's going to be pretty strong against anybody who wants to fight him essentially. So any auto attack based champions, something like a Yasuo, a Trundle, or a Yone, just really anyone who wants to try to trade with him and also kind of considers themselves as a lane bully. Typically Darius can out bully them. And then Darius is going to be pretty weak against champions who can either 1 kite him or 2 poke him in lane. So something like a Cassiopeia can kite him, something like a Teemo or a Kennen can just really make it very difficult for Darius to get to them and get those stacks of his passive up. Some general tips if you do decide to pick up Darius is you want to auto attack before you W to get that auto attack reset in, so auto W auto. It is a pretty quick way to stack up your passive and your bleed. And his biggest weakness, again, is that he can be kited, so you typically want to be flanking on Darius in the late game and not just running directly at the enemy. So pushing the wave and kind of camping out and hiding in your enemy's jungle, and anybody kind of just walking in between lanes, you can pick them off pretty easily as Darius. And in terms of the laning phase, you want to make sure that you're going for longer trades over shorter trades in lane. Number 2 on our list, we did mention him earlier, is going to be Warwick. He's currently sitting at a super high 53.12% win rate in Gold Plus and a bit lower 3.3% pick rate. Don't get too excited though, because he does have a massive 22.4% ban rate at the moment. And a lot of that is because he's pretty solid in the jungle as well. Now, some of the pros with Warwick is his crazy sustain thanks to his Q. Now, since his Q scales based on the enemy's maximum health, it's really great top lane because of all the bruisers and the tanks that we see stacking health. And this also makes him one of the best duelist top laners currently, and he can stand toe-to-toe with the vast majority of champions up there. The great dueling potential also really helps him late game, where he becomes a really good split pusher, so you want to play aggressive with him early, and he does kind of fall off as the game goes on, but we are kind of seeing that this patch, that a lot of the early aggression champions seem to be kind of trending upwards. Now for the cons, as we mentioned, he does fall off a bit late game. He's not the best team fighter unless you can land a solid ultimate, and he's pretty susceptible to CC late game, which is pretty much going to be the case for most auto attack reliant champions. And Warwick is going to be in a pretty similar spot as Darius was. He's going to be good against champions who want to trade auto attacks with him, and he's especially good against something like a Tryndamere, an Irelia, or a Fiora, some of those champions that rely a little bit more on mobility and auto attacking, because you can really lock them down with both your fear as well as your ultimate. And to be successful as Warwick, you do need to play pretty aggressive early to get that massive objective advantage early to carry you into the late game. So make sure that you are playing with those objectives in mind, because you are going to need every single bonus in late game that you can possibly get. Now, Warwick is also going to be pretty weak against poke heavy laners. You are hard countered by Teemo, something like Heimerdinger, and Gnar. So the laning phase can be pretty feast or famine for you. Just remember that if things do turn south, you can always roam with your ultimate. Typically, Warwick is played as a jungler, so he has really good ganking potential. Some general tips with Warwick is, as the game goes on, you want to focus more on split pushing and getting picks with your ultimate. So again, very similar playstyle to Darius. You want to kind of be pushing your lane and then kind of hiding out in the enemy jungle. If it does come down to a team fight, you can use your ultimate as a pretty solid engage tool for your team. Then coming in at the number 1 spot on our list is going to be Mordekaiser. He's holding at a strong 52.36% win rate in Gold Plus, and then a pretty solid pick rate at 8.7%. His ban rate is also on the higher side at 14.7%, but it's not the highest out there, so there's still a pretty good chance you can snag him in lobbies. One of Mordekaiser's biggest strengths is his incredible dueling potential thanks to his W, which is going to give him a strong shield, and it even lets him heal himself. So it makes it pretty tough to trade with him, and it keeps him in the fight longer as well. The one thing that's pretty unique about Mordekaiser is he's really good against mobility champions. So you can kind of pull somebody into that shadow realm and just dominate them in a 1v1. On top of that, Mord's scaling is insane. When he's full build, he becomes super tanky and hard to take down. His late game team fighting potential is huge too, because he can land his E to clump multiple enemies together, and then he can follow that up with a massive Q, almost one-shotting an entire team. Now, some of the cons of Mordekaiser is he is pretty immobile. Now, while he does excel against a lot of mobile champions due to his ultimate, a lot of the times if you can't land a skill shot on them, you're not going to be able to do any damage. For example, if you whiff your E, it's going to be pretty hard to land your Q, and then if you miss your Q, you're not doing a whole bunch of damage outside of that. So it's pretty easy to shoot yourself in the foot when playing Mordekaiser. Now, Mordekaiser is going to be pretty strong versus tankier champions, since his sustained damage lets him wear them down pretty easily, and he's going to be a really good pick into matchups like Zac, Sion, and Malphite. You know, other champions that won't be able to handle the sustain that he brings, and he's also a pretty solid middle ground in the dueling department. So I kind of like to think of him as the jack of all trades sort of top lane. And then Mordekaiser, just like a lot of other top laners, especially if their auto attack base, is going to be pretty weak against anything that can kite him effectively. He's also pretty weak against champions who can out-sustain him, so something like a Warwick or a Sylas. Some general tips when playing Mordekaiser, if you do choose to pick him up, is you want to ensure that you're taking the biggest threat out of the team fight. Even if you lose the fight, the value you get by keeping them out of the fight is very high. Another pretty good tip is you want to store as much damage as you possibly can into your W ability before you do engage. This can be a difference maker in an extended fight. And then finally, don't be afraid to hold your E. Let the enemy waste their dashes and mobility before you send it out. A lot of the times you'll find that whoever you're chasing is going to be walking in some sort of crazy pattern to try to dodge your E. And if you just hold on to it, for the most part, you're going to have no issues sticking onto them. And then if they do end up flashing, you can throw out your E and pull them right back to you. That's going to be it for the top lane at the moment. Let me know what you guys thought. Is there any champions that I left out that I should have included? Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you on the next one.